Hey friends, I've been looking forward to today's conversation for a while as I have returning guest Brian Ahearn to the show, and he's actually joining me for a third time on the podcast. Brian is the Chief Influence Officer at Influence People. He's a keynote speaker, he's a Cialdini certified coach and consultant, and he specializes in applying the science of influence in everyday business situations. Now, the last time he was on the show, we talked about his TEDx talk about the power of persuasion. And it's actually one of the rare few TEDx talks that have over 1 million views, by the way. But today we're gonna dive into some more of that, as well as his new book, Influenced from Above, where faith and influence meet. Brian, thanks for coming back on the show.
Hey, John, I really appreciate you having me back on. I always love the conversation.
I was joking with Matt that we just need to welcome you as like an unofficial co-host of the show from time to time.
I would be honored.
So for those of you that recognize Brian from past shows, just a quick recall, it was episode 68, so that was a few years ago, on ethical persuasion, and then episode 120 on the power of persuasion. And I do want to do a little bit of a recap. I want to talk about those two things. But before we dive in, Brian, for our listeners that might be hearing from you for the first time, maybe they're new listeners to the show, do you mind explaining the designation that you've obtained from Dr. Robert Cialdini and what that means?
Sure. The CMCT, or Cialdini Method Certified Trainer designation, lets people know that I was personally trained by Dr. Cialdini. So after having gone through his 2-day workshop and then completing a rigorous application process, I was accepted to go through the training. Spent a week with Dr. Cialdini and his partner, Dr. Gregory Neidert, out in Arizona, learning directly from them all about what we call the POP workshop, Principles of Persuasion, what they do, why they do it. We had to do teach backs to him and Dr. Neidert, which was pretty intimidating. And then even once we went through all that, had a 100-question psychology test. And then the final leg was when I put on my first workshop, Dr. Neidert came to Columbus, Ohio, and audited the workshop to make sure that I was presenting the material in a way that Cialdini would be more than happy with. And so after having gone through that lengthy process, I got that stamp of approval, and I've been a Cialdini Method certified trainer now since 2008.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you know, we talked about this, the 2 episodes that we had you on where we talked about Pre-suasion and persuasion. And so I feel like that's a good recap as well, because I think for the folks that are hearing that maybe for the first time are like, what does persuasion mean? Do you mind explaining the differences on those two?
Sure. We'll start with persuasion because everybody is familiar with that. Persuasion, according to Aristotle, was getting somebody to do something they wouldn't ordinarily do depending on how you asked. So how we phrase things, how we ask and communicate can make a world of difference between somebody saying yes or somebody saying no. So persuasion is what we do in the moment. And we tend to tap into what Robert Cialdini popularized as the principles of influence, or principles of persuasion. And there are 7 of these, and they are research-based and proven that it makes it easier for people to say yes to you. So tapping into those. Persuasion is what we do before we even attempt to influence somebody. How we set that moment up. And what I talked about in my TEDx talk was what I did persuasively to make it easier for my wife to say yes to me when I asked her to marry me. Right? When I set the stage romantically, it made it much easier for her to say yes to me versus just walking in and saying, hey, sorry for things in the past. I love you. Will you marry me? So that's really the difference. What we do beforehand to set the moment, and then persuasion, what we do in the moment.
Yeah, and for the folks listening to this that haven't heard it yet, I presume they can just Google it, Brian Ahearn TEDx talk. But I mean,
Sure.
it is so good. I mean, I listened to it leading up to the second time you were on the podcast, and it is definitely a worthwhile listen for sure. One of my favorite principles, and we don't have to go through all of the key principles of influence, but I really like the principle of liking and the principle of reciprocity. And I guess I'll paraphrase it in a way that my brain understands this, but you know, I often say that like we work with someone at the intersection of we know, like, and trust this person, and then we have a pain point that person knows how to solve. And so the intersection of those two things is when we work with people. But I guess backing up to the know and like and trust factor, I just love your concept of not only does that person need to know and like me, but I also need to like them. And I guess, I think that's where authenticity in a relationship is born. So I won't make you touch on all of the principles, but do you mind talking on that one a little bit?
Sure. And these two principles came up when my daughter asked me the question that gave me the idea for the book, Influenced from Above. We were having lunch one day. It was a day or two after I'd done a presentation in town, and she hadn't seen me present for a while, so I was really interested to know what she thought after having attended it. And we had this conversation about the presentation, but then she asked this question. She said, "What I want to know, Dad, is where is God in all this? All the psychology that you teach, where does he fit into this?" And I hadn't thought deeply about it, but as the conversation unfolded, the first thing I talked about was the principle of liking. And I said, "Abigail, in a business setting, I might not be able to talk about love. But if I employ the principle of liking the right way, I start to get pretty close to love. And as you mentioned, John, it's not about me getting you to like me. It's about me getting to know and like you. Because when you see that Brian really cares for you, that's what opens you up to whatever I might ask. It moves us from transactional to relational. But the good news is the more I get to know and like you, the more I really do want to see you succeed. And so we've created this virtuous cycle where I want to see you succeed and you recognize that. And so it just transforms everything." And I told her, I said, if I get to that place where I really like those people, I'm getting awfully close to love. And then reciprocity, I said, let's take reciprocity as an example, right? The obligation we feel to give back to people who first give to us. Well, Jesus encouraged us to be the first to give. He said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's better to give than receive. And so we started talking about that principle. And I don't remember all the details of the rest of the conversation, but the question and those two principles stood out and became the inspiration for the book.
Yeah, I love that. Let's actually switch gears and continue talking about your latest book. So, something else I want to brag on you for a moment about is that you're a very experienced author. Your first book, Influence People, was named in the top 100 influence books of all time by Book Authority. And then I believe Influence from Above, that's your latest book. Is it your fifth?
It is my fifth. Book? It's my fourth book on influence. But I had also written a book about my father and his time in Vietnam and our relationship.
Yeah. And so this latest book, thank you for sharing, kind of what inspired it, but maybe talk a little bit about, because I know it's a part two from another book, right? It's kind of the continuation of a different book. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
Sure. The book you're referring to is called The Influencer: Secrets to Success and Happiness. And that book came out several years ago, and it follows the life of an individual named John Andrews. You meet him when he's born, you go off to college with him, and then you begin to follow him in his career as he's in sales positions and various leadership positions. And the book is about him learning about influence and persuasion from mentors, bosses, coaches, etc. And the cool thing about that book, John, was all the characters are based on people I really knew that I learned from. And so it was really nice to be able to honor them. But the book ended with him.
Did they know that they're in the book? Did these people know?
Yes. And I even list them all in the back about the character and who inspired the character. But anyway, the book ends with him leaving his role as a CEO in his mid-50s. So I always knew there was more to be written for him. And then, of course, the idea of this current book, I thought, well, here's an opportunity to see what he's going to do with the rest of his life. And the book opens with him about 18 months into his retirement, and he thinks there's got to be more to life than just enjoying the fruit of my labor and nice vacation and golf and things like that. So he gets involved with his church in a community center building project, and he starts to realize what made me successful in business might not necessarily make me successful with the congregation. And what appeals to people who are part of a congregation may not appeal to people who are outside that congregation, the secular world. And so he begins this journey of seeing how does how do these principles of influence that were so helpful in my career, how do they tie into biblical truth? And then you see him flesh that out as the story progresses.
I'm taking notes while you're talking because I have more things that I want to say about it.
Okay.
You know what I think is kind of cool? I mean, we have an interesting group of an audience. You know, I think there's young folks that listen to us that are in their career and in that accumulation phase of life. But then we also work with folks that are in more of that they've transitioned into retirement. And as you know, Brian, I mean, that's the community that we serve in financial planning and stewardship. Like, we work with a lot of retirees, and I feel like it's an interesting story, especially from the lens of a lot of the client relationships that we have that are quite literally in that period and phase of life. And I see it often where so much of their identity and their meaning is wrapped up into their career and their work and what they do. It's not everything, but it's a big part of what influences their day-to-day life.
Sure.
And so then they retire. And you know, a lot of people, I think, struggle, hopefully not financially. You know, the ones that we serve, there's a lot of planning going up to that point, but they struggle emotionally to just that abrupt change of lifestyle and finding meaning and finding what's the thing that's going to excite them. And I think this is a really good story for that type of person, don't you?
I think, John, that it would make a beautiful gift for all of your clients.
I'm just seeing that for the first time now, but I'm like, yes, of course it would.
But I think you're right. You know, I often tell audiences, if you're like the typical American, you'll probably work about 100,000 hours by the time you retire. You start in your early 20s and you go into maybe your mid 60s. And when people ask what you do, it doesn't escape my notice that we say, I am. I am a salesperson. I am a consultant. I am a VP. When you say I am, you are closely identifying who you are with what you do. And that's why we take it personal when we don't maybe win the deal or get the promotion, because that is such an integral part of who we are. Now imagine that you cut that off. Maybe you retire at 65, you're looking forward to it, but it's no longer I am, it's I was, right? And people do begin to lose a sense of purpose. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Now, some people might be very happy to just play golf every day or go on vacation, but I have a sinking feeling that many people still would like to know that there's something out there to which they can add value. And maybe that is volunteering at your church or community projects or things like that, but something where you are still able to give. And I will tell you, as somebody who's now in my early 60s and a grandfather, I appreciate the opportunity to sow into other people, to take everything that I've learned and hopefully, give it to them so that they can do better than I did. And I would hope that people who are retired would want to have that same feeling of taking a lifetime of experience and investing it into other people or something that will make the world a better place.
Well, something I appreciate about you is actually watching you and listening to the stories about you being a grandfather, because I joke all the time with the clients we serve. It's like my favorite thing is watching people become grandparents, because it just seems like such a fun and amazing thing to happen in their life and to give back to their family and spend time with their grandchild. These stories make me so happy for the future. And again, I joked with you before this, like, I don't want to wish away the phase of life that I'm in with my kids who are 6 and almost 9, but it's exciting to know that there's more of those times ahead,
Yeah. And that's just the right way to look at it too, to know that as much fun as you're having now and recognizing even some of the hard things that you go through, a day or a week or a month from now, you might look back and go, even though that was hard, it was really fun. But I always felt like, as we raised our daughter, that whenever we left a phase like the crawling to walking and walking to running, there was something you left behind. But what we got with that new phase was even better. And then even, with her moving out and then getting married, seeing her prosper as an adult and recognizing, man, we raised a human being who can take care of themselves. Everything got better. And now we're reliving that cycle with Emmett. And it is just so joyful because I think I had told you once before, it's more like being a mentor than being a boss. We don't have that direct responsibility for him, but I just feel like we can love him so much more freely.
That's the best. Yes, you did say that to me before, and I feel like that's the best analogy for that situation. We did, this was a long time ago now, probably like 2021, but we did an episode on the power of positive aging, where I guess I can appreciate the irony that, at the time, Matt and I are like in our 30s talking about about the power of positive aging. But a lot of it was just examples and analogies of, the clients we serve and having a meaningful and impactful transition into retirement. And, I got to tell you, like, so many times do I see, because you were talking a moment ago about the vacations and the travel, a lot of people jump to that right when they retire. So like 6 to 8 months, maybe a year goes by, and they do all these awesome things. And then they come back in for a meeting with me and we're like, all right, how's it going? And there's this feeling of like, now what? Mm-hmm. Like from them, not from me. There's this feel like I can sense it in the room. Like, it's kind of like, well, yeah, we did all those things and that was pretty cool and it was really special and we enjoyed it. But now what? And sometimes I see people go back to work. In fact, a lot of times I'll see, maybe as a consultant, they retired from a high earning job that parts of it they liked and parts of it they didn't like, and they retired for a reason, but now they're going to go back as a consultant or what have you. So I guess I'm curious, in this novel, it's John Andrews, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. In this novel with John Andrews, how did is there any aspect to that transition to retirement that, I mean, I don't want you to give the book away, but is there anything to that, or maybe what did he find in meaning and purpose in his retirement transition?
Well, he did struggle early on with the recognition that everything that he built one day will be gone. Mm-hmm. And kind of like, what was it all for? But he also comes to the realization, and through the help of his wife, her name is Abigail, which we named after our daughter Abigail, he begins to realize that what his real passion was investing in people and seeing people grow and change. And when you do that, I believe, especially in a church setting, you can have an opportunity to have an eternal impact on people. So I don't mention this in the book. I wish I had the aha moment beforehand, but you know that my acronym for the word people stands for powerful, everyday opportunities to persuade that are lasting and ethical. And it hit me that I could change that acronym to powerful, everyday opportunities to persuade that are loving and eternal. Mm. And for me, that gives that purpose, that it's not just about me, John, coming on your show and maybe helping you to get more views. I hope you do. And it's not just about me coming on because maybe I'll sell more books. I hope I do. But I would much rather have an eternal impact on you. I would rather have an eternal impact potentially on your listeners or anybody who picks up the book. Because my belief, faith-wise, is that when everything is said and done and all is gone, the only thing that remains are us, are the people who we become and the people that we have impacted. And so that starts to change the lens. It's a much higher bar than just being ethical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely see that. And I think I like that you explain this in a story format. I also like that it's a part 2. And I guess I'm curious, because this is stuff that you talk about all the time with folks. How was it authoring a book that is more of like a story or a novel, as opposed to maybe what like your first book was maybe more like nonfiction, self-help, personal development in the workplace?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a challenge because I don't read a lot of novels, but I did want to challenge myself. Could I write a business parable? I was thinking about like The Richest Man in Babylon and Bob Berg's The Go-Giver. And I've read a number of business stories like that. So when I set out to write that first book, I knew I was onto something because I have an app where I can import what I'm writing and then I can listen to it. And it's super helpful for writers. But we were driving to Pittsburgh, my wife and I, And I said, would you listen to this and give me your feedback? And so we started listening to it, and she was sharing thoughts. But I overheard her tell somebody, yeah, Brian's writing a new book, and it's like a novel. And she goes, it's actually really good. Now, she reads those kind of books. So I knew I was kind of hitting the mark with that. Then I learned a lot in working with a publisher on the book about my dad and writing my family history, which is still a story, but a different kind. So when I got to this book, I really felt like I had a very firm foundation under me to be able to write a story that's even more engaging, I think, than the book The Influencer.
I also think that your audience, or just the average reader, would appreciate that too, because it is a different. I mean, I'm used to reading. I mean, if you behind me if anyone's watching this on YouTube, it's like all it is like Tony Robbins books and multipliers and Unreasonable Hospitality. Those are the books that I tend to read. They're not so much a story format, but yet it's probably just frankly an easier read. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you read these self-help books and you're like, I can only go 10 pages at a time before I got to put it down and do critical thinking and, do an exercise. They always, at the end of every chapter, you got to do some exercise. This is probably just like a nice fluid read, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it is. And you get to see how this stuff works real time.
Yeah.
You get to see how John can either himself be using or teaching others to use these principles of influence, but in a way that's a little bit different, where he's connecting, like the words of Jesus about reciprocity. He's making that connection. He talks about the principle of unity as the principle that really gets us closest to love. But you get to see how he puts it in practice. So many other books we can read and we glean all this knowledge, but then how do you put it into the real world? And to help people, at the end of each of the chapters, there's a short paragraph, a reflection point, to just get you to slow down for a moment and think about what you read and how might it impact you, or what doors might it open for you.
That's nice. That's nice. The first book of, what's the first book of the story again?
The Influencer.
The Influencer. So in The Influencer, was there any, I know the conversation with your daughter really sparked the influence of more of a faith influence, the influence of God. But was there anything that now you can look back at The Influencer and say there was some of these concepts of Christ or of faith, or does it really mostly present itself in the latest book?
It much more so in
Okay.
the current book. But in that first book, the setup, you see that John is a very good person. I mean, he wants to do right by customers. He sees when people do things wrong, and he makes conscious choice to say, that's not the kind of person I'm going to become. And he recognizes too that by authentically using these principles, he can build genuine relationships. That he's not doing these things just to get people to respond to him. He's doing these things to build relationships that both sides win with. And then in the end, yeah, it does help his career, absolutely. So I think you will see that, like, hey, there was this foundation here, but this goes to a whole different level as he begins to, again, make that connection between biblical truth and these principles. And one thing I would like to encourage people who are listening, even if you say, well, I don't consider myself a person of faith, or I don't go to church, I think the vast majority of people would still say, you know what, the teachings that Jesus put forth are good. That if people did those things, the world would be a much better place. And so I would encourage somebody who might not fall into that church camp or faith camp to still give it a try. To just say, look, this isn't about evangelizing. This is about understanding how we can take these concepts of influencing people and do it in a way that has even more integrity and potentially an eternal impact.
Well said. Do you mind touching on the principle of unity? Because you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I know it has a big influence in this book.
Sure. So the principle of unity says it's easier for us to say yes to those who are of us, those with whom we share an identity. The example that I always use is my father having served in the Marines. My dad would have done anything to help another Marine. In fact, he even wrote in the book that I wrote about him, there's a whole section of what he wrote, and he talked about that he still valued Marine friendships above all others, even if they were not from Vietnam. He said there's an invisible bond that joins us forever. And that gets to the heart of the principle of unity. If we take it to the deepest level, the deepest self-identity that we have with others is family, right? John, you will do anything for your wife and your kids, and you'll probably do just about anything even for extended family members. And so what I tell people is this is what gets us closest to love, because love isn't about the feeling. We always think of that like falling in love, but the biblical love is about self-sacrificial giving to others. And if you think of this, there are things, I'm sure, John, that you would do for family members, maybe distant family members, maybe some that you don't even necessarily like a lot, that you would probably not do for even your closest friends. So unity isn't about necessarily liking the person. It's about recognizing because of this connection that we have, I should therefore do something. And we're wired in such a way that when we do that, for example, if my dad helped another Marine, even if he didn't like the guy, he still got something out of it because that connection was almost like helping himself. So I really think this gets us closest to love. And the final thing I'll say about this and see what questions you have, in the book Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis said he struggled with loving people that he didn't like. And then he said he realized there was somebody that he didn't necessarily like all the time, but he always loved. And he said it was himself. That there were things about himself that he did not like when he saw them surface, but he recognized he still always did what was best for C.S. Lewis. And that helped him overcome the fact that he can love people even if he doesn't necessarily like them. And I think the principle of unity clearly shows us this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Like holding up the mirror and realizing you need to love yourself too. I think that's important because you hear that a lot. Also, like about forgiveness, you know, we forgive people who've wronged us or who do things to us. And then sometimes you need to hold up the mirror and realize that the only person left to forgive is yourself for the things that you've done. I
think when it comes to loving ourselves, I do think we naturally do that, but we don't necessarily know the best way to do it, right? So some people wanting to avoid pain will turn to things like drinking, drugs, sex, and other things, right? Not necessarily the best thing for them, but they are doing it because they do not want to feel pain. So it's not necessarily the best way to love yourself, right? The best way to love yourself would be like maybe working with a counselor and facing the issues and overcoming them. So I do think that we always are trying to do what is best for us as individuals. And the same thing with forgiveness. I think that when we talk about not forgiving ourselves, I really think it's a matter of like truly accepting the forgiveness that's there that will allow us to feel free to not keep saying I'm unworthy or to turn away from that forgiveness that hopefully others are offering, but that God freely offers us.
Yeah, I agree. I like the evolution of, just going back to some other things you've said, the evolution of liking to loving, you know, because I could appreciate that in the business sense, you know, the acronym for people probably would have been hard to use the word love, you know, in there. But in this context, it seems so natural. You know, it just does seem to fit really well.
Yeah. Let me say this too. Like, if you think about like lasting, eternal is better than lasting. I mean, it's the lasting forever. So that gets deeper. And then ethical is good. We want everybody to be ethical. But I think the problem is with human beings, we always want to know where that ethical line is. And we are willing to like nudge right up against it rather than saying, okay, if that's the bad place, I'm going to just stay as far away as I can. But I think loving does that, because if our focus is love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, love my neighbor as myself, I don't even have to worry about where that ethical line is, because I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to cheat. I'm not going to bend the truth. I'm not going to do any of those things that we talk about when we have an ethical framework.
Yeah, one of the quotes I hear you use often, which is one of my favorite quotes, is that, and this ties into that ethical standard that you're talking about, and the line of that ethical standard, that it's not enough to just tell the truth. We cannot hide the truth either. Do you mind elaborating on that? You have a few good analogies for how you explain that.
Yeah, so if the standard is to be truthful, I could tell you the truth, John. But I could also know that there are things that are material to your decision making, and I'm withholding them because I'm afraid, like, oh, well, if you know that, then you probably will say no to whatever it is that I'm offering. And the example that I've used quite often was, if I were to sell my home and you're walking through the house, I can tell that you really like it. If you were to buy my house and then move in and move the carpet that's in the basement, and you see there's a crack in the basement floor, if you called me up and said, hey, Brian, why didn't you tell me about the crack in the basement? It would be indefensible for me to say, well, John, you didn't ask, and try to feel good about myself that I didn't have to tell you that because you didn't ask. An ethical influencer, if I were in that situation, I might say, John, it looks to me like you and Jackie really like this house. Come here, I want to show you something. Bring you down to the basement. You see my weights in there and everything. And I say, I've got a weight room here. I've got some carpet down. Makes it a lot nicer. But I move the carpet and I show you the crack. And I say, I would never want you to make a decision and not know about this. We've lived here for 35 years. We have never once had moisture seep through it. But again, I don't want you to think I'm pulling a fast one on you. At that point, you and Jackie or somebody else would probably be thinking, like, this guy's pretty honest. That's how we approach things ethically. So I not only was telling the truth, I didn't hide the truth either. I brought to the surface things that I think would materially impact your decision making.
I love that you use that example, because I've heard that analogy from you before, and it lives in my brain to the point where when we sold our home, we sold it to friends of ours, or people that we're kind of, our families are growing up together because our kids are friends and we spend time with them, and so they're friends of ours, and I did that. I literally, your analogy was in my head, and I'm like, oh, I've got to show them, like, here's a couple things with the AC, and then we, like, for me it was like I want to fix these things before, and so we walked through it and I showed them everything, and because I didn't think it would deter them from buying the home, but same as the example that you're giving, I wanted them to fully know what I knew about the house in a way that I think probably the average person would be sort of apt to saying, like, well, if your inspector finds it, then great, and if the inspector doesn't find it, it's not on me. But I just want you to hear that your analogy of that, it lived in my head so strongly that when it came to that, I kept thinking about it over and over again. And I'm like, okay, we got to show them this on the AC. We got to show them this with the sprinkler system.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, because that's the kind of impact I want to have on people, that if nothing else in our conversations, it changed how you might have done something. And not that you would have been trying to hide something, but God forbid if they had bought the house and the air conditioner and some of these other things that were not addressed, they'd probably be frustrated, and it may have changed their thinking about you. But instead, you took the high road, and they're probably feeling like, oh yeah, none of this stuff that's cropped up is a surprise. We knew about it. John told us about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the reasons that we get along so well is that, listen, it's that, like, the name of our company has the word candor in it, and we use that often to describe, like, just radical honesty, like open and honest conversations amongst our team, with our clients. And so that phrase or that sentence, that it's not enough just to tell the truth, but we cannot hide the truth either, that it really resonates with me, and it's had a lasting effect. So, it was important for me to share that with you. Brian, as we're wrapping up the show today, any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
It's been a fun journey for me. When I first started this, when I met Cialdini in 2008 and went through the training and got out into the world and felt like, man, I really know this. And compared to the vast majority of people, I really did understand it. But the further I've gone, the deeper I've gotten in terms of my understanding. And so liking moved from, making connections with people just to get things done, to where it really was about me getting to know and like them. And because of that, the relationships that I built, and how ethics went to a much deeper level. But now with this book, I just feel like, having love as the standard and thinking about people from an eternal aspect, it just brings it way, way deeper in terms of the depth of understanding and how I will be applying it to people. And I hope that people who pick up the book would see that and would say, I want to go for something that's a deeper understanding of human beings and how we interact with them.
Where can they find the book?
So the book's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online retailers. And I will tell your listeners, if you buy the book and then you send an email to booklaunch@influencepeople.biz, if you send an email with the title of Chapter 2, I'll send you a link to a free ebook copy of The Influencer. So you'll have the prequel for this particular book if you're so inclined to want to get more on the backstory.
Oh, I like that. That's a good. Say that email address one more time, and we'll put it in the show notes.
booklaunch@influencepeople.biz. And I chose Chapter 2 just because I didn't want people to, have to go out and scan a receipt and, do all that kind of stuff. So they'll get an automatic reply when they send the title of Chapter 2. So you either put it in the subject line or in the body of the message, but you'll get an email that will give you a link to that. And somebody said, well, what if somebody doesn't buy the book and they send you the email? Well, you know what? Then they probably need to read the book more than anybody because why would you want to be deceitful to read a book about ethics?
That's what I was going to say. If they do that, then they need it, and that's your gift to them. I'm sure that's your philosophy. It would be mine too. So, okay. So you can go to Amazon and buy it. Influenced from Above, Where Faith and Influence Meet. I will, since you proposed that challenge, I'll add one more to the mix. First 10 listeners that text me with your name and, just write Influenced from Above. We'll get with you and we'll send you a copy. We'll get you a copy of Brian's book and send it to you. So you can text me to 407-904-8414. So Brian will really, incentivize people to go out and grab that book. It's funny. I have it. I've never read a book on a Kindle before, but when we were talking before, which by the way, like just another great conversation. I joked with you a few weeks ago and we talked that we should have just hit record. We probably could have just hit record and recorded an episode right then and there because every time we talk, I feel that way. But when we were talking, it was on pre-order at the time. So I clicked it was like one click buy and it was sent to our Kindle. And so I was like, oh man, like while we were talking, I was like, Brian, I already bought it. I don't know how to open it up on Kindle, but I'm going to figure it out. And so my wife has one. So we're going to figure it out. And it's going to be a book study in our house. We're going to read it together.
Oh, cool. And, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me.
Yeah, you're the man. I mean, you always have such wisdom to share, and I'm grateful to share these conversations with our audience. And then I guess one final thing. So Brian, for the folks that are maybe new to the show and hearing you for the first time, aside from the book, best place to maybe find and connect with you online?
Well, I'll give you two places. The first would be my website, which is influencepeople.biz. You go out there and I've been on a couple hundred podcasts, so if you like this show and you can listen to lots of others, I blog every single week. You can sign up for that. I've been doing that for 15 years, so that's a lot of writing. You'll see videos and other things. But LinkedIn is also the other place. John, I post content daily, so you will continue to learn about influence through the things that I post on a daily basis out on LinkedIn. And I will tell you, when you send your request to connect, if you don't tell me how you found me, I guarantee you're going to get a message back saying, how did you find me? I like to know why people are reaching out. But even if you did send a message, you're still going to get a personal reply because that puts the social back in social media.
Yeah, well said. That's awesome. And folks, remember, head back to episode 68 or episode 120 of the Above Board podcast if you'd like to hear our other conversations that Brian and I had. And we'll be sure to tag all this stuff, Brian, in the show notes, the links to your LinkedIn and to your book and to our other podcasts. Brian, honor as always to have you with us on the show. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to our listeners for hanging out with us today. We're so motivated to do these podcasts each week. And as I said before, this podcast is a documentation of our growth and our journey and progress in life. And it's an honor to share that journey with you all. So thanks for hanging with us today on the Above Board podcast, and we will see you next week.